So, it turns out that Ravi Zacharias, the late Christian apologist and founder of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, wasn't without his faults. I'm not here to talk about that today, but I do want to draw your attention to a comment he made about Krishna in his book, Jesus Among Other Gods. That is ironic in hindsight, to say the least. The playfulness of Krishna and his exploits with the milkmaids in the Bhagavad Gita is frankly an embarrassment to many Hindu scholars. By the way, the word milkmaids is usually not translated from Sanskrit in Hindu texts. It keeps the original word gopis, so I'll just call them gopis from now on. Now, anyway, the first thing to point out about this is that he gets the source wrong. The Bhagavad Gita does not contain any interaction between Krishna and the gopis, or indeed any gopis at all. The Bhagavad Gita is Krishna making a series of exhortations to Prince Arjun on the middle of a battlefield. I hope you can take my word for it that there were no milkmaids in the middle of a battlefield, but you can read the Gita yourself if you want to make sure. It's available online with a quick Google search. The place where Krishna has an interaction with gopis that looks problematic if you just take the story out of context is the Shrimad Bhagavatam, Book 10, Chapter 22. This is a completely separate work from the Bhagavad Gita and the larger epic that contains it, the Mahabharata. The Shrimad Bhagavatam belongs to a category of texts called the Puranas, which is an entirely separate genre of scripture. Whether the Puranas are meant to be taken for their high-level philosophical value, as stock stories to help you think about God, or as genuine accounts depends on which individual Hindu you ask. If you ask me, they are just stock mythology that provide you with ways of thinking about God that you can choose to accept or reject as they work for you. However, the Puranas do fall under a category of called Smriti, which is understood by Hindus themselves to be human works. And the Shrimad Bhagavatam identifies itself as a supplementary text in Book 1, Chapter 2, Verse 3. By the way, I see no evidence that the English translator of this translation of the Shrimad Bhagavatam that I'm using from 2012 found the story to be embarrassing because they translate the work as is without any abridgment, deception, or euphemistic language. The second point to address is that the section heading in Jesus Among Other Gods, where Ravi Zacharias makes this statement, is called A Life Without Blemish. And the point he makes in this section is that Jesus lived a more moral life than any of the figures that he compares to here. Therefore, he is the true God and the others are false. Irrespective of the truth or falsehood of this claim, this reasoning in and of itself fundamentally misunderstands the concept of God in Hinduism. The key difference here is that individual Hindu deities are not supposed to be infallible. Their actions are governed by karma, like ours is. There is no story or legend of a Hindu deity or a Hindu avatar where that deity or avatar's conduct is prescribed as a pattern of conduct for mankind to follow. Making God and goodness the same axis is a uniquely Abrahamic concept. Krishna's significance to Hinduism primarily comes from his teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, which Ravi Zacharias himself clearly thought favorably of because in his other, later book called New Birth or Rebirth, Jesus Talks with Krishna from 2008, which contains a hypothetical conversation between Jesus and Krishna, he has Jesus praise the teachings of Krishna as the closest to his own. "O Krishna, of all teachers you came the closest to what I taught. You were the most similar to me in the solution you brought to the problem of the human heart." Now, as for the actual story I believe Ravi Zacharias was making reference to, but I can't be sure about because he didn't even get the reference right. If it's what I think he's talking about, it occurs in the Shrimad Bhagavatam, Book 10, Chapter 22. Here, some gopis are bathing nude in the Yamuna River, and Krishna takes their clothes from the riverbank and climbs up a tree with them. Sounds pretty objectionable, right? Well, if that's the only context you get, it would. These gopis were already in love with Krishna and were performing a month-long vow to attain the status of his wife or consort. On the final day of their vow, they bathed nude in the Yamuna River, which violated the vow and angered the gods. Krishna affirms this in verse 19, And the girls recognize this as a mistake on their part in the very next verse. Because you, during the observance of a vow, were bathing naked in the water, you have offended Varuna and the other gods. To atone for this, you must pay your obeisances with your palms joined together over your heads, and then take your garments back. With this being pointed out by the infallible Lord, the Vraja girls consider their skinny dipping a fall from their vow. So, to recap, the entire story that Ravi Zacharias is making reference to occurs in a secondary, supplementary scripture. 2. Ravi Zacharias himself agrees that Krishna's actual teachings are hard to dismiss out of hand, even if you follow a religion that tells you that all other religions are satanic and will send you to hell. 3. Krishna's conduct is not prescribed as an example for mankind to follow, and this idea fundamentally misunderstands Hinduism. 4. These actions were not a wanton act of perversion, but chastisement for the violation of an oath executed by a god. But I agree with you, Ravi. It's certainly wrong to exploit women that you're in a position of power over.